The British Army officer leading Boris Johnson's efforts to deliver hundreds of thousands of coronavirus vaccines per day pledged to use combat techniques to get to the needy as fast as possible. That does conjure up an image, doesn't it, of a man in combats cartwheeling ninja style into your front garden with a syringe in his hand. I like the idea. Brigadier Phil Prosser, commander of military support to the vaccine delivery program, said his team would use our extensive operational and logistic experience to deliver vital supplies across the UK. He will lead soldiers distributing the drug across the country in a bid to get the lockdown eased as soon as possible. This comes, of course, and I want to sort of get into this question of, do you now trust the government to get us out of the COVID nightmare? Do you trust the government? Instinctively, no, I don't trust the government. I'm watching the likes of Matt Hancock. That's the best we can do, a Matt Hancock character. This man has disappointed me because I think, like a lot of people listening to this right now, I think you probably share this as well. Right at the beginning of all of this, and we're getting towards a year now, I kind of had an empathy with Matt Hancock. I thought, this guy I think he's doing his best. We didn't know much about him. He was, appointed Health Secretary fairly recently at that point, comparatively, and I was with him. I was willing him on. But it's kind of got to that stage that I felt myself willing him on, much like you kind of will somebody on at a school sports day who was never going to win. It's kind of that sort of, come on, you can do it. Go on, Matt. Come on, Matt. Go on, you can do it. Go on. Yeah, no, it's gone. And that's where I sense we're kind of at with Matt. However, he sort of set out 4 key criteria for lifting the latest lockdown. This includes how well the vaccination program is working. He suggested the new restrictions may run until at least March. We know we're going to be locked down till March. A year locked down, pretty much a year locked down. What do you make of that when you just sit and digest all of that? And we can go into the kind of the Orwellian nature of this, the authoritarian sort of sense of a government locking down its people, and for the common good and all the rest of it. I'll say what I've said consistently. Is there really no other way than decimating livelihoods and jobs? Is there actually no alternative? And I say that with the caveat of Sir Simon Stevens. Don't be going around the place going, this is all made up. I'm reading just this afternoon, breaking news, the Mayor of London has declared a major incident in the capital as the spread of COVID-19 threatens to overwhelm the city's hospitals. It was Lincoln, wasn't it, a couple of days ago, where we had exactly that breaking news as well. And there's a contingent of people. I'm bound to ask why you don't believe that, because there's been a few. We mentioned this the other day. A few half-wits have kind of gone into hospital with a camera phone, which is the point that Sir Simon Stevens made up. And they pitched up at either sort of 7:30 in the morning or 9:30 at night and walked around areas that would be closed anyway at that time, and somehow extrapolated from that there's no one in there. There's no one in the hospitals. And all of these nurses, they're absolutely distressed, and doctors who are just, and it may well be, fewer staff, fewer beds. I get all that. Whatever the stats are, this isn't about COVID being particularly deadly in itself, by the way. If anyone tells you that, that is a nonsense. We know that you can die of COVID-19, but in of itself, that isn't the big problem. The big problem, as I see it, is capacity to treat people who do get it badly. And it's the denial of that fact, the denial that clinicians up and down the country are overstretched at breaking point, can't go on much longer. You get a load more cases they've got already. They're going to have to start deciding who they treat and who they don't treat, or who they don't treat as much as they would like to. That's where we're going to be. This idea that it's 1-to-1. It's one nurse to one intensive care bed. Lots of hospitals saying we're now in a place where it's one nurse to 5. Intensive care, often a team of people around you. That's all going to go by the wayside in some areas. Now, you might work in a hospital, I get it, that isn't in this place, that isn't suffering any of this, where it's very normal for this time of year, etc. I understand all of that. I do not believe that every clinician and every doctor that speaks out on this, and we'll be speaking to one very shortly, are all making this up for some reason. But I am bound to ask the question why you are cautious when you see doctors and nurses make that claim. Why does that make some people feel uncomfortable? It's kind of up there with the Trump thing, isn't it? I don't want to go over that again for another day, but the denial of the absolute obvious. It's no busier than normal. Death's no different to any other time. Well, and that keeps moving as well. People were saying death's no different to last year. Now it's sort of every 5 years. And I heard somebody the other day say it's no different to, there's been worse ones in 20 years. So how far do you go? Go back to the war, for goodness sake. Yeah, a lot of people died in around about 1940 to 45 seemed to be pretty bad. Something happened in 39, I'm sure it must have done. So it's that kind of thinking. It doesn't matter. Whatever you think of the stories, whatever you think of how we should be dealing with COVID, and I'm absolutely convinced there must be alternatives to the contradictions in the current lockdown policy. The fact is the hospitals are on their knees and doctors and nurses are struggling. And that's one of the big problems we face right now. However, Matt Hancock, so I'm going to ask that question to what's behind that thinking? What is behind? As you're going to go full-blown tinfoil hat, and please don't do this is not the place for you, okay? This is not the station for you. If that's where you want to go, get on the internet and listen to some dude in their pants in a bedsit broadcasting from there, okay? They'll tell you what you want to hear, all right? They'll tell you that it's all made up and there's some big reset coming and all manner of other terrible things are going to happen, and the bloke that used to run a computer company is going to change your DNA and make you grow another head on your backside and all manner of other terrible... Go there. Don't come here for that kind of stuff. But I'm genuinely intrigued as to what that reservation is. What is the core of that reservation? Most of our listeners on this station are level-headed, sensible, ordinary people. And I think the presentation team here reflect that. We don't believe that doctors and nurses are making this stuff up. We know that the government need pressing on issues. We know that Matt Hancock, you have to press doubly. The first press is to make sure he's still breathing. The second one is to make sure that he can answer a question in a straight way. So we get all of that. We understand that. So press and push and delve and probe and all the rest of it. Let's not deny that our medical teams in this country are flat out right now. Some on their knees. It's a grim picture. So what's with the denial? What's with the denial of that? I'd be intrigued. My wider question, though, is do you trust the government to get us out of this nightmare? And so the 4 criteria are this, basically. No more major variants of COVID, hospitalizations to fall, death rates to fall, vaccination program needs to work. Well, I think the latter will work, but it's now in battle, isn't it, with rising death rates. And Julia had that very powerful interview. And it was so good, I listened to it twice. I listened to it as it happened. I listened back to it on the train. What was the fellow that she had on? Who was he from the NHS Confederation? Chris Hobson? That was the man, wasn't it? And it was, I thought she made mincemeat of him, frankly. And that's not the aim of the interview. It's not a, people do that depending on, if a guest is really good, somebody will always call you up and go, they made mincemeat of you. It's like, well, that's not the point. But Julia was simply arguing the case of, if somebody is in hospital anyway and they die of COVID, do you add that to the list in the same way? Should there not be almost a separate figure to define that? So these are the kind of inconsistencies, the lack of that sort of information that leads people down paths that aren't good places to end up in. But broadly speaking, I'll throw out that question. Do you trust the government to get us out of the COVID nightmare? I want to say yes. I'm reserved about it, and that's partly because I don't fully trust our politicians. Where do you sit on that one? And the other issue as well about the NHS. Well, what's the deal with not wanting to believe the chaos and the trauma that is going on in our hospitals?